Okay, I'll press start now. Okay, we're gonna start. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Railway, Civil and Just Association Lunch and Learn session on the importance of temporary works presented by Steve Williams, Buildings and Civil Engineering expert in Network Rail. Next, please. If it's your first time with us, we are the Railway, Civil and Business Association, the RCEA, and we are part of the Institution of Civil Engineers as a specialist knowledge society. Next slide, please, Steve. So for a quick introduction, we were founded in 1921 and we exist to encourage the exchange of knowledge and experience between railway civil engineers. And in 1997, we became part of the Institution of Civil Engineers. In our activities, we work closely with other engineering disciplines through the Railway Engineering Forum and Young Railway Professionals. And currently, we have over 400 members across the UK and also a few abroad. And our main activities are hosting a program of 10 evening seminars a year at London and across the regions, with the exception, which is every month, with the exception of July and August. And this year is our first year that we are pioneering our lunch and learn sessions, of which you are taking part in one now. And we are constantly looking to expand our program to include more regional events outside of London and to have more collaboration with other societies. Next, please. So our next event, which will be on the Thursday, the 27th of June of 2024, our last event before our summer recess, we will be having a presentation on the Hope Valley Railway capacity upgrade, which will be held in the Premier Inn at 72 Dale Street, Manchester. And this event will be hybrid because we will also be presenting it on Teams Live as well as in person, and it will highlight the before, the challenge and the solution of this multi-million pound project, which was substantially completed in the spring of 2024. We will have 3 speakers from Story Contracting, namely Jamie Walker, Tom Adamson, and Dominic Mills. Next, please. And if you are fancy getting involved, please join our next committee meeting. It won't be at the end of May, my mistake, but it will be on Tuesday, the 25th of June, 2024 at 5 p.m. for 1 hour, and it's held online on Microsoft Teams. And if you are interested in taking part in our committee, or at least to see what we do in our meetings, please email us at rcea@ice.org.uk for more details, and we would love to have you take part. Next slide, please. And finally, if you are interested in joining us as a member, our ordinary membership costs £18.50 for this year. Our young professional membership, just anyone who's a GMICE or under the age of 35, it will only cost £8.75 a year. Retired members will only need you to pay £5.50 a year. And if you're a student member of the ICE, your membership is free. And you can go on our website at rcea.org.uk or follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Steve.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I've seen a few of these lunch and learns and been very interested by them. So hopefully people looking in today will be quite interested in this one. We'll see how it goes. So my name's Steve Williams. I'm the engineering expert for buildings and civils in Network Rail. And I'm 35 years into the game now. I was a young pup in 1987 when I got a job as a student engineer on a thick sandwich. And I remember in the first week, the two directors of the company, a guy from a company called Tarmac that became Carillion, and a guy from Pell Fritchman, joined forces together and said nothing goes out of the door of this consultancy unless there is a sequence of construction on there. So I've always been interested not just in designing stuff, and I'm more interested in designing it to be safe so that it can be built properly, and therefore I'm interested in how it's built, and that has been built into me for the past 35 years, and that's why I've got a bit of a passion for temporary works and how that works with permanent works. So we're here to talk about the importance of temporary works from a client's perspective, and there's 40,000 people in Network Rail, so this is the voice of just one of them, but I think I share my thoughts that you're going to see in the next 45 odd minutes with quite a few people, both within Network Rail and more importantly within the supply chain, who do so much good work for us. So without further ado, I want to go through a long list of context. And I'm going to say here and now that I will be skipping through and shooting through quite a few of these slides, because I agreed with Steve McCormack before the meeting that we'd put lots of slides in there, and rather than cut them back out, they give you the opportunity to pause the recording and look at some of the things that I won't actually have time to talk about in any detail. But what we have got is quite a lot of things, as you can see there. We've got an introduction. We'll talk about the safety vision. Then we'll talk about what are what are temporary works. Some standards and controls, and don't worry, I won't be going through all of those in any detail, but just to give you a flavour. Then we're going to talk about the early focus on constructability in temporary works, health and safety by design guidance that's been developed by us in the supply chain. Then we're going to look at some lessons learned as to what might go wrong if we don't get the things I'll be talking about right, and also some showcases for great temporary works engineering, because the vast majority of the work that the supply chain does for us and our internal people do is successful, efficient, cost efficient, carbon efficient, and results in a really good project. But we've got to be careful, because we're not that far away from not having the right desired outcomes if we don't pay attention to what I'll be talking about. And then there'll be some conclusions. So let's talk firstly about the Network Rail Improvement Plan. We're very fortunate that the business has been allocated through direct funding and from money received from passengers and freight. Total £45 billion in the next 5 years. That the control period 7, as it's called, started in April this year. So we're just about to start it. We've just started a new control period, and in there we will be spending billions with the supply chain on designing and executing works for renewals and enhancements on the railway. And just by way of example, two recent projects, a huge amount of really interesting work went on at Barmouth. And just for your information, tomorrow the TWF are presenting TGP are presenting at the TWF meeting on Barmouth. And then earlier late last year, we did quite a lot of work at Newnham, where there were issues with the supports to a bridge, and the supply chain was brought in and very quickly did a huge amount of really good temporary works and permanent works installation to get us back to running trains in that particular area. Now let's talk about safety for a moment, because I'm a bit passionate about what it says on the screen there. Everyone home safe every day is our safety vision. It's been that vision for quite a while now, and of course the consultancies, the arm's length bodies like Network Rail, such as Highways England, and all. In fact, I'm sure every person looking in will have some sort of equivalent in their own organisation, but we hold this dearly and passionately. Everyone home safe every day. And I say that with some authority, because the piece of paper that was the top half on the last slide, the bottom half of the same piece of paper is signed by Andrew Haynes, and it says all of the things that you can see there. Now I'm just going to highlight 3 of them. We will plan work to ensure it can be done safely. We will stop work if it cannot be done safely. And we will design, construct, inspect, operate and maintain the railway to keep everyone safe. And with that in mind, and you've already seen a couple of examples of where temporary works is vital to us providing efficient solutions, we want to provide those efficient solutions safely. So let's talk about what are temporary works. Spend a few minutes on this one. So the HSE have said temporary works are the parts of the construction project that are needed to enable the permanent works to be built. You can probably read this faster than I can say it, but I'll say it anyway. Usually the temporary works are removed after use, e.g. excess scaffolds, props, shoring, excavation, support, full through and formwork, etc. Sometimes the temporary works is incorporated into the permanent works, e.g. haul road foundations and crane or piling platforms may be used for hard standing or foundations. The reason why I've got this on the screen is actually what it says next. It's very important that the same degree of care and attention is given to the design and construction of temporary works as to the design and construction of the permanent works. As temporary works may be in place for only a short while, there is a tendency to assume they are less important. This is incorrect. Lack of care with design, selection, assembly, etc. leaves temporary works liable to fail or collapse, while in fact it also leads permanent works to fail or collapse. And this places people at risk of injury and can cause the project to be delayed, reputational damage, you name it. I thought that was interesting because we're already aligned with the HSE. This is from BS 5975. This is one of the first of many slides with lots of words on it, but I'm just concentrating on the boxed part of this standard at the moment. It can be described as providing an engineered solution, etc. That's broad, and then it lists the description of temporary works includes but not limited to all the things that you see listed. I'm just going to highlight one of them. The description of temporary works includes supporting or restraining plant materials or equipment, including stability of waterborne aircraft. So for instance, if we've got a bridge structure and we have got temporary plant on that structure, is the bridge temporary works? I'll let you work that out for a minute. Then it goes on, and so much I could talk about for hours and hours on 5975, but I haven't got the time. So I'll talk about this particular one. Permanent works designers should address the buildability of the permanent works and identify and make provisions for any temporary works and temporary conditions required by their design and their assumed method of construction. This should include, and you can see a load of things listed. I'll just concentrate for a second on that. Temporary works and temporary conditions. So let's scratch our heads over that one for a minute. I'll also bring CDM into the fold. The designer should liaise with the PD to provide all necessary information to any temporary works or temporary conditions to the PC through the PD. When my bosses told me that I couldn't release anything from the consultancy that I was working for without a sequence of construction on it, that was for the good reasons that are now embodied into CDM and L153 by way of example. So we now move to an excellent book, thoroughly recommend it, Temporary Works Principles of Design and Construction. I'm sure you've all read it. Please note that there is a version 3, a 3rd edition coming out this year. Hopefully that will be coming out fairly soon this year, and there is a dedicated chapter on railway produced by various members of the supply chain with a bit of help myself. And I will take this opportunity to give my personal great respect for the late great Peter Pallett, who passed away only a few weeks back and will be missed by everybody in the industry, whether it's permanent works or temporary works. Everybody owes Peter Pallett and his wisdom. We owe him for what we've learned, and hopefully I'll be passing a little bit of that learning on to you today. So examples of temporary works include trenches and excavations. So some people think that we've got an excavation there. There isn't any temporary works there because we haven't put all the sheeting on the sides of it. No, it's just an open. Well, actually, according to this, temporary works includes excavations. I'll let you dwell on that one. What about this? Structures in the temporary condition. Permanent works structures during construction that are unstable or having insufficient strength, and structures during demolition and dismantling. So there's another take on things, and it continues. Okay, Client's Guide to Temporary Works from the Temporary Works Forum. Now this was produced before the latest version of the CDM regulations, but nevertheless is a jolly good read, and I fully recommend it to everybody on this call. This guide asks readers to consider the following also: states of the permanent works which are temporary, loading conditions of the permanent works during construction or project execution which is not envisaged in the permanent condition. structures in states of modification or demolition. You're getting the gist now. And also some really important points here. In seeking to ensure that clients' interests are served with regard to temporary works, and by the way, I think that includes consultants and contractors' best interests, their reps could usefully challenge themselves with the following questions. In what way can I be assured that the permanent works design solution is developed to minimise risk from temporary conditions? We should all be asking that question. And also, in what way can I be assured that those temporary conditions of the permanent works that need temporary works to control them minimise the extent and complexity of the temporary works, eliminating, substituting and reducing them so far as is reasonably practical to minimise the risk overall? And I'll be dwelling on that in a little bit. Next page is Appendix B, where there's a whole page of narrative which you clearly can't read on that paper, but I'm just signposting it to you. That's a great read to talk about the wide scope that is temporary works and temporary conditions. They conclude that section by saying the safe position is to consider that every condition on site is temporary works until proven otherwise, and it gives two main exceptions, as you can see there. And then it also says, and sorry for me taking so much time just defining what temporary works is, but I think it's really important that we get the full scope. Whether or not something is strictly temporary works or not doesn't alter the fact that it must be managed safely. We can all agree with that. The management system set out in 5975 is well proven, and its principles can be applied wherever design and construction are interwoven, as they often are. Those with responsibility must ensure that professionals with the necessary competence are appointed, and also wish and are paid to collaborate. More of that in a bit. This applies equally to the permanent and temporary works teams, both. And I love this little sentence. It is good practice to design structures to be built. They can't be wished into place. So, to conclude this bit, from our health and safety by design guidance note on early focus of constructability in temporary works, we've defined, and this is a collaborative effort between the supply chain and ourselves, temporary works can be defined as those parts of the works that allow or enable construction of, protect or support or provide access to the permanent works, and which might or might not remain in place at the completion of the works, including states of the permanent works which are temporary, loading conditions of the permanent works not envisaged by the permanent works design, and structures in states of modification or demolition. So it's a coverall. And on the basis of that definition, and we can argue greatly as to whether or not it could be different, on the basis of this, I'll be continuing for the rest of this presentation. Some relevant standards. I am going to go very quickly through these. One of the standards is that we require our PCs to have a PC license, and there is an assurance standard for that. In that standard, there are requirements that are red ragged, which means we can't vary against them. And 9.3 is for temporary works, and it's shown on this screen. I will dwell on it only for a moment. This gives a whole list of things that we expect our PCs to do, and they do. So that is great. But this is an expectation for the business that they do all the things in there. And I'd ask you to please, if you're only halfway through reading that, please pause and think about it and see that your operation is doing what we're asking of it if it's working on the railway. Then we've got a primary engineering management for projects RSC 0209 standard. This defines various roles such as the DPE and the CRE. No time to go through all of this now, and you wouldn't want me to anyway. But here's one for the DPE. The DPE should check all engineering deliverables appropriate to the project stage and phase, have been reviewed to check all aspects of construction, operation, maintenance, decommissioning and removal have been considered, including all necessary requirements for staging and any temporary works needed for construction and maintenance activities. And also, when we appoint a CRE, we look to find out whether or not that CRE is also acting as the temporary works coordinator, which is a requirement of 5975 and a requirement of our PCL. And if not, we look to find out who is going to be the temporary works coordinator, which, as you'll be aware, is a pivotal role in ensuring proper integration of temporary works. Then we've got a standard, and this is one of many similar standards for different disciplines: engineering and architectural assurance of buildings and civil engineering works. So we've got a standard in place, and those of you who work on the railway will be hopefully very familiar with this standard. This requires various things, and I'll just highlight these two. The permanent works designer shall confirm the temporary works requirements as part of the permanent works design at both AIP and detailed design and check. And the temporary works designer shall account for the temporary works requirements in the permanent works designs. This is an expectation that our permanent works designers will be thinking about temporary works, and that our temporary works designers will be thinking about the permanent works, and hopefully integrating the two. As part of some recently updated guidance to Civ 003, we've got a set which is GN Civ 003. We have got a section on temporary works, and the list, and this is 2 pages of points that are really good points that have been produced over a period of about 20 years that are good things to do for business. So if you follow these things, hopefully you de-risk projects. And I'll just draw your attention to a few of them. The project team should undertake constructability reviews from early design stages to enable efficient coordination of temporary works and permanent works requirements. And I am going to read the note out. Early consideration of the provision of all necessary temporary works will enable constructability and maximise efficiency, allowing the team to develop temporary works designs which are fully risk assessed and fully integrated with the permanent works, and vice versa, in good time to allow safe, efficient design and execution. Now, what's not to like about that? Also, all parties should follow the guidance, health and safety by design guidance, which I'll come to shortly. And all parties should comply with 5975 unless varied by Civ 003. The TWC needs to be in place, and it needs to be competent and experienced. Couple more, there's another page full here. All activities should follow a clearly defined work package plan with defined sequence of working when critical to temporary stability. Any changes to the work package plan or sequence should be referred to the designer prior to any variation. Some examples coming up of that where that hasn't quite gone to plan. And also any significant site changes to temporary works which might affect Network Rail managed infrastructure are to be agreed with the designer prior to execution, with redesign and assurance as appropriate, as required by 003. And finally, provide and enable sufficient time to do all necessary planning and design to enable safe and efficient construction without importing risk. Here is a page devoted to the health and safety by design activities and the guidance that has been produced. And this group is a supply chain, Network Rail, working together to think about health and safety by design. And over the years, we've developed some really useful guidance. I haven't got time to go through this in much detail now, but I am going to. I've pointed you in the right direction. There's a link at the bottom, and you'll get these links at the end. And that link is to this freely available information. And if there's nothing else that you do as a consequence of what you've heard today, please look at the guidance note, early focus on constructability and temporary works. That's been produced over the past 15 years. It's on its 4th iteration and is well worth a read, whether or not you're in railway. There's also another standard, Civ 0063. This is for all the things that you see at the top for similar plant operations on or adjacent to the railway. Now, we have got a vested interest in ensuring that things that might affect the railway don't affect the railway adversely, and so the people who work within influence and distance of the railway. So there are various requirements that ASPRO will deal with when you're working on such projects, and we need to prevent things happening like the things that you see in this slide. So we have a standard called 0063, and on the right hand side of this sheet you can see a figure 1, which is in the published version 2 of this standard, which was only published 10 days ago. So if you're not up to speed on the latest version, issue 2, then this and the briefing for this are all available on the systems that you can get our standards from. This basically says that if you're outside, if your compound collapse radius is outside 4 meters from a line drawn outside the boundary to Network Rail managed infrastructure, you've got a level 1 hierarchy. Low risk, no risk, to collapse or oversail within 4 meters of the boundary, effectively safe. And then you've got a hierarchy of risks that depend on whether or not the plant has the possibility of collapsing onto the railway when lines are blocked, and indeed when lines are open, and there are various requirements depending on the circumstance. That's well worth a read. Now on to the early focus on constructability and temporary works. 80 odd pages long. I'm only going to give you a few of them, and I'm going to go quickly through them as well. Definitely worth a read. One of them is what it says here. Many of the problems caused by a lack of constructability or inadequate consideration of temporary works are due to a lack of focus and planning at an early enough stage in the project. And this is where I'm really trying to push people to think about temporary works and permanent works early doors. A lack of focus and planning at an early enough stage leads to late procurement, late submissions, compressed review times, disruption to works, lack of appropriate risk assessment, lack of understanding, and mistakes. It also leads to late change and poorly managed change, all importing risk. It's worth a moment to dwell on that when you get time to have a look at these slides afterwards. And also in Appendix A, whizzed all the way through to Appendix A, there's an example of a constructability review. You can do this in many ways, and this is just an example that supply chain and ourselves have come up with as basically a list of questions to ask when you're looking at a constructability review to make sure all the ducks are in a row. And just at the top it says, at AIP stage onwards, is the IDC and IDR complete, and do these consider both the permanent works and the temporary works design interfaces with each other and other asset groups? It's important that we do all of that early doors, in my humble view, and the view of the supply chain. Now let's have a look at this particular one. Have a clear understanding of these issues, particularly at the early stages of the project. It is vital to ensure there's a robust basis for selecting a single option, and that the selected option doesn't carry undue risk impacting safety program costs, rail network performance, or otherwise. We're expecting consideration of constructability at an early stage, well before we get to AIP, so that we know we've got the ducks in a row and that we're heading in the right direction. It's really important we do that, otherwise things can go pear-shaped quite quickly. Also, it is essential to point somebody to have these accountabilities and be the controlling mind. Okay, for instance, the TWC or the CEM supported by the CRE, these roles will help ensure all of this coordination is done, and I won't dwell any further on that. This is an example of where things didn't quite go to plan. This is Gerrard's Cross in 2005, and there's some links there to some really useful information that's been dug out of HSE by a member of the public, which gives you a full insight into what happened here. But in a nutshell, the tunnel collapsed because the crown was overloaded and there was insufficient backfill to the size to maintain it. It induced excessive bending moments at the quarter points of the arch structure, leading to the formation of plastic hinges and subsequent collapse. Yeah, that's all very structural engineering, isn't it? What actually happened was the sequencing that was agreed wasn't followed, and therefore the loads on the structure weren't as envisaged by the permanent works designer, and it collapsed. There were signs that it was not behaving properly because the crown was much lower than it should have been, but nevertheless we were very, very lucky that a train exited that path soon before it collapsed, and we didn't have a disaster on our hands. Lots of lessons to be learned just from that one. And then quickly, LTS line, imagine if that piling rig had fallen over as a train came into that path. Yes, we want to avoid that, folks. And in the guidance, there's examples of where we need to do things better, but also really good examples of good practice as per the right-hand side. I won't dwell on that any further now. So let's have a look at some lessons learned. I'm just conscious of time, so I will speed up slightly. A few years ago at Gypsy Patch Lane, we were trying to move a 5,000-ton bridge into place during a blockade using SPMTs. On the right-hand side, you can see a a trial run. They didn't turn the wheels, but nevertheless there was the mat went down by about 8 inches or so. So is that a success or a failure? Well, you can guess what the criteria said and whether or not it was a success or a failure. But notwithstanding that, things proceeded. The place was a quagmire, as you can see on the bottom right, and the axles got stuck in the mat. There was a long overrun, and there was no one hurt, although there could have been. And there was a lot of things that went wrong on that job, which were entirely preventable. So very quickly, L153 of the CDM guidance, and I don't think I'll be mentioning CDM much more. The PC should liaise with the PD throughout the construction matters on matters such as changes to the designs and the implications, put my teeth back in, these changes may have for managing the health and safety risks. Now, the design, which you can see bits of on this screen, showed using our health and safety by design warning triangles guidance where they needed to have hard surfacing where they were turning, and it also did a comprehensive designer's risk assessment and put the key risks on the drawing, and you can see them on the right hand side if you want to pause. And but oops, sorry about that, execution was not in accordance with the design. There was ineffective execution and ineffective assurance. DRA residual risks were shown on the drawings, were not followed, and design changes were made, but nobody referred back to the designer. In fact, the first the designer heard about this was when there was a phone call saying that the mats failed. What can we do? That's wrong, folks. You need to, if you're going to change the design, you need to involve the designer. If you work together as a team, you'll have a solution that's safe. If you don't, things might go wrong. Next one, we were very fortunate that this incident happened on Christmas Day in 2020, because you can probably imagine, looking at the left-hand picture, the state of play had people been going about their normal activities in the units underneath these arches. Nobody was hurt, thank goodness, but about 80 meters of the spandrel and the parapet to this viaduct went over, and there is a link to some videos showing it actually happened from the cam from the plant that was sitting on this viaduct. So what went wrong here? There's insufficient consideration of the effects of heavy plant loads on the existing structure. So was the temporary works there? Go back to what I was talking about earlier. Insufficient understanding of the condition of the existing structures, insufficient coordination between disciplines, and insufficient learning from previous similar occurrences. So we've had this occur before, but we didn't learn from it, and we've done a lot of learning since on this particular example. You can see the state of the brickwork with bits of chopped down buddleia. Well, you know what happens with masonry when it loses its bond, and when you don't work out the forces from the plant on the structure that you're changing the track on, then you might be importing risk. You certainly will be if it's not capable of supporting those loads, as was the case here. Okay. Then there's a scaffold bridge. This was to divert services, and this failed back in 21. We were very lucky here because I say lucky, I shouldn't really say lucky, but we were lucky because nobody was killed or injured, but it could have been so different. It collapsed onto the railway, and the two people on the scaffold at the time, the third person on the scaffold had gone down to say to his supervisor, "I'm not happy with this, it's too wobbly." The two fell off the temporary works onto the P-way. If it had gone the other way, what might have happened? We were lucky. But why did this happen? So we're not lucky. All of these things are legitimate reasons why things went wrong on this particular project. And I'm conscious of time, so I won't dwell on any of them, but I'll let you read them at your leisure in due course. But the main one is this. There was inadequate time given to design, check and assure and execute the proposals. For various reasons, which I haven't got time to go into today, we put people in a position where they might have not got home safe every day. And I find that deeply unsatisfying. And lessons have been learned from this particular incident. And those lessons are actually incorporated into updates to the standards that I mentioned earlier. So hopefully if you follow the tips that I've been through previously, we'll never be in a situation again where that sort of thing might happen. Fingers crossed. Not fingers crossed, really. Actually, if you follow the rules, if you follow the guidance, if you follow the standards, the chances of de-risking this sort of event from happening are vastly improved. This is Huntington Tunnel. This was November 22. And in a nutshell, during a heavy rain event, lots of stone from both the permanent works and the temporary works washed onto the tracks. And you remember, unfortunately, Stonehaven, where lots of stone washed onto the tracks, and unfortunately there was a tragedy. That wasn't anything to do with temporary works, but here we were lucky to a certain extent, because this happened on this was happening on a Monday morning when people turned up for work and they stopped trains running. There wasn't anybody on the site on the Sunday. If this had happened 24 hours before, things might have been different. But why did this happen? The temporary works that was designed is in the areas in green, okay, and the temporary works that wasn't designed is shown in brown, or orange. What happened was there was a change, meaning that they couldn't access in the way in which they previously thought they could access because of third-party issues. As a consequence, to crack on, it was decided that they were going to pipe a ditch. Now, this green area here has a bridge over it, but they decided to pipe this ditch, and it got very, very rainy. And the PCI information said that this was a problem for water, and it flooded, backed up, and caused the washout. No design, no assurance, no designer's risk assessment, and pressure to deliver following changed access arrangements. We need to give people the time to do their job properly, and they need to do the job properly. More recently, this is October 23. This is under investigation at the moment as part of a class investigation, looking at the bigger picture here. Plessy, again, we've got a huge, this is 30, I think it's 36 tons. It's a huge piece of plant called a superbug, and that was used for a track renewal. And it is suspected that there was contact between that plant and the structure, and the structure leant over and could have fallen over. It had to be demolished, and you can see from the photographs here, it looks like it's in quite a precarious state. It's actually rods in the permanent works that are stopping this from actually peeling over. That could have been a really big problem. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. Okay, why did it happen? So the risk of imposing additional horizontal loads onto walkways, spandrel walls during construction works, i.e. the temporary state, temporary condition, was not identified or considered during the pre-construction activities, contrary to everything that I've said in the past half an hour or so. And these are the key points. The processes are in place that are designed to prevent these things from happening weren't followed. There wasn't a B&C project engineer in place. The DPE was not experienced in buildings and civil structures or temporary conditions. There was no temporary works design assurance in place. There was insufficient consideration of the effects of the plant on the existing structure, and the forces imposed by the heavy plant were twice the resistance of the structure. So, lessons learnt, folks. Well, I've given you two examples where we haven't necessarily learnt lessons, but hopefully moving forwards, we'll be learning lessons from these events so that we build them into what goes forward in future. I'll come on to that in a second. So that's enough about things that have gone wrong and reasons why we think temporary works is very important. But this is also about why they're important. Showcases for temporary works engineering. This is a good one. This one is a local award winner, and this is a project where the permanent works designers, the temporary works designers, the PC, the sponsor, the entire team work together to enable us not to close the road, so that would have meant a 40-odd mile diversion. So the permanent works designer changed the permanent works design in conjunction with the temporary works designer, who was changing their temporary works design, so that they could integrate permanent works and temporary works and get a really successful project delivered. And hats off to the team for doing what they did there. No time to go for the detail. Here's another one, Warrington Dive under box jack. This project considered, it couldn't have been done without a full consideration of both the permanent work situation and the temporary work situation, and an intense coordination to actually box jack on a curve, which was certainly unusual. I don't know if it's unique, but it's definitely very unusual. And they put in, they box jacked this structure under the railway on a curve. And the engineering that went into that is fantastic, and I haven't got time to talk about it, but I've got time to show you some links to some really interesting stuff on that. Also, East West Rail, this is Bletchley Flyover, innovative engineering integrated safe by design. The presentation made health and safety by design was, and we saved a fortune, and they did this by thinking about how they could build this safer by integrating the permanent works design with the temporary works design. So, for instance, they used modern methods of construction, and some people in the business will argue that modern methods of construction have been around for decades. They've just rebranded it, but nevertheless, they used MMC in order to affect efficiencies, and we should be doing more of that. For instance, we didn't need to use lots of expensive formwork because we use precast concrete panels to effectively be the formwork for the abutments. And of course, that means more craneage. So there's balances to be had. And the team worked together to integrate things like having castings within the concrete so that they could fix scaffolding for access purposes to it. This is proper integration of permanent works and temporary works. And last one before I finish, and I know I've got a few minutes. Ravenscraig, we took the lessons learned from Gypsy Patch Lane. In fact, we produced an EAN, an engineering advice note. Then we helped the TWF develop some industry-wide excellent guidance on SPMTs, and the team at Ravenscraig used that guidance to help deliver a fully integrated permanent works and temporary works solution, which resulted in a very successful project. And hats off to that team for bringing together the thinking that way to deliver in the way in which they did. So, conclusions. Just before I do, this is a link to a paper that has been written by myself, but based on 15 years of work with the Health and Safety by Design Forum on embedding the integration of temporary works with permanent works on railway projects, and it uses something called the Health and Safety by Design principles. It includes some of the examples that you've been given, but for the price of a pint, that is well worth a read, and I thoroughly recommend it to you. So on to some conclusions, leaving a few minutes for some questions. Do you agree that adequate consideration of temporary works, including temporary conditions, is key to business efficiency and safety? Do you agree that such consideration will prevent collapse, prevent ingress or egress of materials, de-risk injuries or fatalities, de-risk delays, reduce financial, contractual and reputational risks, reduce project costs and improve the carbon footprint of projects? Well, I do. Have you considered constructability from the earliest stages in design development? Get the contractors and the engineers in the same place to work on the best solution early doors. How are your projects ensuring that temporary works are developed to AFC? Has permanent works and temporary works sequencing been fully considered, including consideration of all the temporary conditions of the permanent works? Has all the sequencing been integrated between the P works and T works, appropriately agreed and checked? And is there a control in mind? and more. Has contingency planning taken place in case things don't go to plan? Is there appropriate supervision by appropriately experienced persons on your project, including engineering supervision where appropriate? And if things aren't right, are the right people looking at them? Are any necessary changes to any design verified by the designer and checked? And are all the risks being properly assessed and eliminated, mitigated and controlled so far as is reasonably practicable at all times? And nearly finally, how do you disseminate lessons learned and good practice, both internally and externally, for wider industry benefit? And that's the reason why I'm here today, folks. So in conclusion, what will you do differently moving forward to get everybody home safe every day? And any questions can be directed to me at the email shown in my final slide. So Gian, that's it. And I'm more than willing to take any questions that have come in. Unfortunately, I can't see them.
Okay, so far we've had two, but one looks more like a statement. One was from an anonymous person who said Atkins was involved in the Cat 3 check of rebuilding of the arch, including checking every temporary work. And another one, which is a question from Chris S, who asks, how do you think the design of temporary cable diversions should be managed in the real environment, as they tend to be outside the British and civil standards?
All right, okay. So if you look at this, the Civ 600 series standards, we talk at length about all sorts of utilities, and there are other standards for utilities, such as the one for UTXs, which is often used by outside parties, which is Civ 045. And there are many standards that I've talked about where we should be considering services by doing the necessary liaison with highways and with the utilities. We've got a series of standards that apply, 600 series, if you weren't already aware. So there's something you could go away and look at. But we should be managing them as a team with the owners of the utilities. And for instance, at the scaffold collapse, one could argue, why didn't we drop the cables? Well, we didn't drop them at the cables because we weren't granted permission to do so, so I understand, which led to the solution of having them up in the air. But there were other changes that occurred on that particular job that meant there wasn't sufficient time to do things in the way in which they should have been done. And that resulted in what could have been a fatality, but fortunately it wasn't. So how do you think the design of temporary cable diversions should be managed? That should be managed in accordance with our standards that mean liaison with the utilities to make sure there's an effective solution. How's that?
Yep, thank you very much.
Okay.
Coming it all up. The next question from an anonymous party was how to break down the risk-averse approach by the major permanent works design houses, which means that they don't often take on the temporary works design, although permanent and temporary works should be dealt with holistically.
Well, I agree that permanent works and temporary works should be dealt with holistically, and the way in which you do that is by bringing people around the table. Now, I would, as I come from a consultancy background, I'm well aware of restrictions on PII insurance and competency in the temporary workspace, which is probably the reason why my two gaffers, one from Tarmac and one from Pelfrishman, came together to say our USP is the fact we're going to give you an integrated solution that considers how you build it as well as what you're going to build. And that to me has always been my mantra, because I was taught that as a pup back in 1987. Excuse me. So I wouldn't say I agree with the risk adverse approach from permanent works designers. I don't agree with that, actually. What I do believe is that the contractors should fully respect the designers, and the designers should fully respect the contractors, and the two of them should work together with the client and the stakeholders, of course, we've mentioned utilities, to achieve an effective solution. And the only way you can do that, in my view, is by doing that early, getting the right people in the room and developing a design that right from the early stages considers constructability. That's the way in which you can break down an apparent, although I don't agree with it, risk adverse approach. I believe that our permanent works designers, when they consider constructability, come up with some utterly fantastic solutions. And I'm going to go, if I can, it's going to take me a while, right back to the start of this. If this is still being shared, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm going to go right back, keep going, getting finger eight now. Right back to the two I showed right at the beginning of this. And keep going, Steve. Crikey, I've got through a lot of slides very quickly, haven't I? Apologies for that, guys. But no, you can read them at your leisure. There you go. These here. Look at that new bridge at Barmouth, being run along the railway, ready to be replaced the old. Okay, the permanent works designer couldn't have done this just thinking about permanent works. The permanent works designer was also thinking about temporary works, and vice versa. So there's a whole team of people involved in this, and they came together to develop a concept, develop that concept into design, get all the designs assured properly, and then execute using the sequence of works that everybody understood and that resulted in a really good job. So I agree with some of the statement. I don't agree with the parts of the statement, but the solution is come together and work together to achieve desired aims, such as what you see in the slide now.
Thank you. Next question from B. Bailey, which goes, really pleased to hear that temporary conditions need to be discussed in the same light as and resulting temporary works. This should be recorded in the temporary works register as well, given the outcome impacts how the risk should be managed. Good practice for temporary works coordinators?
Absolutely. So if you look at our temporary works guidance, we want to think about a temporary works register right from the start of the job. Yeah, and then what will happen is our assurance standards say in certain circumstances you don't actually need to carry out assurance of a temporary works design, but you still need the design where it doesn't affect our infrastructure, for instance, and there's rules in the standards. But this thought process of temporary works including temporary conditions, I think, is fundamental, because often people think, well, there's no temporary works on this job, we don't need to think about temporary works. Well, actually, if you think about temporary conditions, that might make your mindset think, well, actually, we do need temporary works. Or why haven't we got the temporary works? How have we eliminated the risks? And it goes back to I spent such a lot of time talking about the definition of temporary works, and we've decided to include temporary conditions within it, although you could argue that they're both distinct. Okay, we purposefully want the mindset to think temporary conditions, because that will help us establish what temporary works may be necessary, and also what temporary works might be eliminated. You can only really do that if you understand not only what you want to build, but how you're going to build it. So constructability is key, hence the guidance that we've produced. I think that answers the question. Yeah, trained temporary works coordinators will be thinking like this already. What we need is the broader people involved in design and execution of works to think the same thing, and then things won't get missed.
So we've had quite a lot of questions come through on the chat, but let me see. I'll talk about one that's already been published. So a question which says, I note that you don't refer to or differentiate the PC TWC from a TWC as required in BS 5975. Is there a reason for this in the NR world?
There's no reason for this in the NR world, because we actually say in our standards that we need to be following 5975. So who's your DI? Yeah, you'll know in the latest version of 5975. And by the way, I think that is being updated fairly soon. I think that is due for publication this year as well, the 2024 version. That there is the need for PCTWC, but there's also the TWCs from the other contractors, and they all need to. I haven't got time to go through the requirements in 5975, but the TWC from the PC and the TWC from the supply chain all need to work together. Yeah, I haven't differentiated from them in this particular 3/4 of an hour because I think I've rammed in too much already. But look at 5975 and you'll see from there that, and you look at our standards, we require our PCs to have a TWC, but there will be coordination down the line, especially for very complicated projects.
Okay, I think we have time for one question, and then what I'll then do is I'll collate whatever questions we can't answer in this call. I'm already putting it onto a Word document, and then I can send it over to you, Steve, to respond to it. And after that, I can distribute it to the
I'll do
audience.
That with pleasure. If you've got any questions, get them over to me, and I'll give a properly considered response to them all with signposting, and then that can be published. That'll be useful for people, I'm sure.
So one that I will ask you now on the call from NDM, who says, what is your view on design engineers gaining that experience, bearing in mind that ICE guidance no longer mandates this before becoming chartered?
Okay, so it is a view, absolutely essential. Don't know why they got rid of it. When I was a pup, I'm you can tell I'm still young, but I'm not as young as I once was. When I was a pup, it was mandated, and I had the privilege, and I genuinely believe it's a privilege of acting as a resident engineer. So imagine somebody who's wet between the ears, being a resident engineer. Although under the ICE 5th edition, you needed to be chartered to be the engineer on the job, but I was effectively acting as the resident engineer. What it meant was I actually designed drainage on Telford Way Industrial Estate in Kettering in my year out, and then when I came back to work for the same company after I graduated, who gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, I ended up building it. So I was building my design, and I learned an immense amount about constructability. But we'll go back to what I said at the start. My gaffers insisted that no design went out the site without having a sequence of construction. So it made you think about not what you were building, but also how you were building it. And I believe that if we as an industry, for instance, could do more secondments where we can rub each other's backs by having secondments from contractors into consultancy and vice versa, that will be a fantastic thing for business, because it will enable the mindset of bringing these things together. So I would fully endorse secondments, and indeed some of our supply chain do a fantastic job for us doing that, and let's have more of it. It will help the industry. I'm absolutely certain of it. So cracking question, Andy, and hopefully that's answered it.
Okay, I think we have just enough time for one more question from Naval. So Naval says, first statement, Honiton was my project. I was the DPE. The contractor submitted the temporary works one day before, and I was busy. I escalated to my boss. When asked what happened, I was told temporary works collapsed outside the railway. Now on to her question, which is, when were the constructability reviews introduced? In many cases, in CP6, I saw that this contractor and designer discussing the constructability only at IDC.
Oh, okay. So there's a T minus process within Network Rail, and that basically says, have we got all the ducks in a row? Are things ready? I would expect when you're talking about T52, right out there a year before, have you got all these things in place? Have you done the constructability reviews? These are all guidance. Okay, they're all the right things to do for business. Okay, so I would have expected any project to look at constructability. And for instance, you don't want to be designing something that hasn't got the space for the temporary works that's needed. You need to work out where you're going to be putting your cranes. You need to work out how much space you've got for the permanent work. So you've also got to work out how much space you've got for the temporary conditions. All of these things, all of the things that I've said in the past hour, if they're followed, will result in much better solutions. Now, what I think was said was the temporary works was outside the railway, but it clearly influenced the railway. And because of the situation at Honiton and the fact that they knew that this area flooded quite frequently and that there was a lot of issues with floodwater from the stream, if they'd have thought of things, they might have said, hold on a minute, we need to repeat what we've already done 20 yards further downstream and put a bridge in rather than just throw some twin wall pipe in. And that is a mindset, saying somebody looking at the overall picture saying, well, hold on a minute, we know that this is a problem, we need to do something about it, and then they can do the design. So it looks like we're running out of time, folks, so I will hopefully that's answered the question. But you can now point yourself at the guidance where constructability reviews are really important.
Yep. Thank you everyone for attending. And what I'm doing now is I'm just collating the questions that haven't yet been published, and I'm putting it into the document for Steve, and then we will endeavor to get this put out the door and to within your inboxes as soon as possible. So thank you very much for attending this call, Lunch and Learn, and I hope you take part in future RCA events, and please do consider joining us as a member. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.